How's it going, YouTube? Back with another video. Been quite a long time, but this is a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. I'm going to talk about 5 tips to get you up and running up to a decent level of productivity right off the bat with Cubase Pro. Now, I've watched a lot of kind of tutorial courses where they'll have like the first few episodes free and then the rest of the course is paid, which is fine. And the first episode is usually like jumping right into the bat or going over the basic controls, which, I think anyone can look at the transport bar and know, you know, anyone with eyes knows what play and stop and rewind is. I'm going to go over 5 things that I think are really important for any producer really starting out with Cubase, or if you're not already doing these things and you've been using it a while, you should be. And some of these are also quite relevant to any DAW. So if this sounds good to you, let's jump in. Okay, we're here in Cubase Pro 11, and this is actually the first video that I've recorded in 11, and we're going to look at the first thing that I think is really important to sort out. So when you first open Cubase for the first time, now I'm assuming you've already installed all your VST plugins. Your Mediabay here for your VST effects, if we go to the default, it's going to be kind of all over the place, especially if you've got quite a few plugins. Like if I go to the other folder, it's got loads and loads of all different plugin types from different people. It's no good. So you're going to want to almost straight away, as soon as you start amassing a lot of plugins, create your own profile. Now, the way that I've structured mine is by type, then by developer. So, if I want my FabFilter Pro Q, I know I'm in EQs, FabFilter, boom, there it is. 2 clicks, no scrolling through menus. If I want distortion by Sound Toys, there it is, Decapitator, Devil Lock, whatever. So the way to set that up is really quite easy, is you just go into Studio, VST Plugin Manager, all of your plugins installed, your effects and instruments in 2 different libraries will show on the left, and you can create your own folder structures by going New Collection, either empty or copy current collection, and then you will add folders with this, or you can go in and delete folders with this. So you basically just create a folder structure that works for you, and then you drag the relevant plugins like Steinberg Distortion would go in there. And if I open that, you'll see that tube is in there. And this translates over to here. So if we look in VST instruments, I've got drums, Steinberg, backbone and groove agent, predictive drums, battery, dramatic 4. And normally these third-party plugins won't have the picture. It'll just be like a little grey photo box. So the way to get that is just drag it in once and hit this button. And whatever the state of the graphic is on this at the time will be saved as the picture. And you can oversave it. And once it's done once, they're there forever. You can browse lists, but I find them easier to recognize quickly by the way they look. So I keep it that way, just drag them in. Set that up for both your instruments and also for your effects. So as you'll see, it all translates over here. I've got reverbs, Valhalla, FabFilter, Isotope, etc. Very important. Get your plugins into a structure that works for you, where you can find them quickly. Number 2, we're going to look at Mediabay. This is all about sample management, and again, this is a technique that's going to translate over to any DAW. We're going to look in this computer, E, and you'll see I've only got this production folder highlighted here, and that means that Mediabay won't be searching through games, music, or anything else. Now, these are the 2 folders where most of my samples are, and I've favorited them up top here. So we'll close out of my computer. Now, the overflow was my original sample library, and it's got all kinds of stuff still in here. Like if we go into this Loop Masters pack, we can look at Cold Cut Sound Science. If you want to look for loops or whatever, you're navigating through all of this structure. If you want to navigate for kick drums, for example, we're going to drum hits, kicks. And when you want to start a project, it can be useful to just pull together a folder of 20 kick drums, 20 snares, a few percussion loops, some bass hits. And you're not going to find all of those in one pack. You're going to be going through lots and lots of different packs to pull these from. So having them all in these different file structures is just a pain in the ass. So what I've been doing gradually, and I've only really done it with my drum and bass packs so far, is moving them to here. So if I go to loops, I've got bass loops, and this is basically every bass loop from all my Loop Masters drum and bass packs, BHK, Sample Genie, and so on. And most of the time they're tagged by tempo and key. So if we load that, keep that down a bit. I'm just going to grab my headphones. I press play again. Okay, so this is a bass that's at 174 BPM in the key of E, and you can see up here, Cubase has tagged it close enough to 174, and it's in the key of E. Now, I think I probably had to tag the keys myself in most cases, and to do that, you just make sure that this right panel is open, and click in key, go to E, E, done. And what that means is using these controls, like this is a 174 BPM sample. If I just go ahead and play it now. Our tempo here, if we make this say 130, and we turn this on, it's now going to play in tempo. It's going to audio warp because Cubase knows its original tempo. So let's play. So you can hear that slowed it way down, and it's using the warping algorithm Elastic Pro Time, I believe. And moving on, tagging them by key, and this is where we move on to tip number 3, and that's activating certain features that aren't there by default in Cubase. So the first one, if we reset this, you go into the drop down. The only one really that I add is project root key. And what that allows you to do is, say we chose the root key of A, and we go into, I'm going to ignore my own sample packs for a minute, and we'll go to the standard Steinberg loops and samples and maybe start messing with some techno stuff. So first of all, let's get a kick drum. We're going to analog techno. I'm going to go to kick drum. Let's just grab one. Okay, that'll do. I'm going to bring that into the project by right-clicking and creating a sampler track. This dramatic can go. All right, so I'm going to reduce this to 1 bar and double-click to create a region. The root key is C3, but that's a little high because it's a kick drum. Let's bring it down to C1. And on C1, we expand this a little bit. We'll just go ahead and draw a kick drum on every beat of that bar. And then we'll go ahead and duplicate this. Highlight them all, hold right click, select glue, glue them, and go back to the selection tool. If you highlight that part now, we can hit P and loop the length of it. And that first one was clicky because the Mediabay played it again over the top. So we'll come out of there now. Let's go to the mix console, bring the volume of this down a bit. I've already got the additional volume control on the control room down -6 dB here, just so it doesn't overpower me talking and be a bit jarring. Okay, so now we can start messing with the project root key. Let's first have a quick look for some percussion loops. maybe in the same pack here. See what we can find. Here we go. One thing that's quite cool here, so in order to audition in project tempo, we need this selected, and this one will play it in sync with the project if we hit play. But it doesn't just do tempo, it also does pitch. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm just going to turn this down. Another thing that's quite cool is if you drag these samples in while it's playing along with your project, you can kind of pre-mix it with this preview slider, and it will base the volume of the track that you add on the level here. So let's have a look at that. Okay, let's come out of that so it doesn't double up again, and you can see it's brought it in at a pretty low volume. Let's duplicate it. Now, I want to make sure that we're not following global transpose on any of my percussion. And let's see what else we've got here. Let's maybe check dance floor tech house. Let's find another percussion loop maybe. Not bad for a first pick, and you can see this is a very good way to just get a vibe going incredibly quickly. So we'll take those now, duplicate, hit this one, hit P. We got a bigger loop. Let's have a listen. Let's actually find some music loops or something, some synth or bass. Try that. And now this bass loop is in D, but it's going to have been transposed to A to fit our project. If I turn this off and play it, you can hear it's much lower. And that'll happen with anything that's tagged by tempo, whether it's a Cubase or Steinberg loop or one from your own library that you've tagged in Mediabay. So let's go ahead and drag that bass loop in. And have a listen. Let's find something else. Back to the Mediabay, back to Tech House, find some synths. And you can see as I dragged it in while it was playing, it brought it in already at a low volume. Let's find some more synths. Okay, so we've got enough to play with there, and let's see what happens now if we change the key. cool stuff, right? So yeah, if you tag your samples, it takes a long time, but if you start doing it early on when you don't have too many packs, it's beneficial. I used to have mine quite well organized, but it was still in its original format on the external drive. I brought all my samples back to the UK when I moved back from Seattle, so I had to basically restart my structuring again. So yeah, very important sample management, just as important as the management of your plugin tree. If you want to be productive, and using features like this project root key, you can really take advantage of that in Cubase. I'm not sure if other DAWs have this same kind of feature where it'll automatically transpose audio and MIDI. If I was to record MIDI in here in the key of F and I change that, it will transpose those MIDI parts as well. So yeah, moving on. The other one really is keyboard shortcuts. We're going to edit key commands. There are two specific key commands that are pretty much essential to set up to speed up workflow. Now, the first one is in audio bounce selection. Now I've got it tagged to Shift and F3 here, and the other one that I use all of the time, and you will too, is render in place. I've got render settings, Shift and F2. I have render with current settings as in part of a macro that also mutes and hides the source MIDI material. And if we go to macros, I'll show you that one. Right here, render and hide MIDI is on Shift and F1. Now, I can trigger those with one hand on my keyboard, with the right hand playing keys and the left hand on my QWERTY keyboard, or what I've done here is also assign them to side buttons on my mouse. So I can render in place, hide the original source, and bounce audio regions with this one. Super helpful. Those two shortcuts are essential to have at the very least on a key command, but if you can assign them to a mouse as well, you can trigger it with either hand while you're playing keys with the other. And finally, control room. So I can demonstrate that a little bit now we have some audio in here. So if I go over to the control room tab here, it's going to look a little bit complicated if you don't really know what it is. Now, first off, this master bus is being fed into control room and being channeled by control room into one of two monitor outputs. Now, my sound card, which is a complete audio 6, has two stereo outputs, and I have output 1 and 2 feeding into my Adam sub, which is then feeding into my two Adam near field monitors, and output 3 and 4 goes to my DTA80 headphones via my sub pack. Now, when I'm capturing audio in OBS to record these videos, I have to use output 3 and 4, because in the back of my sound card, I also have cables coming out of 3 and 4, feeding back into the sound card on an input, I think input 3 and 4. And that input is what OBS is capturing for my Cubase audio. So I'm using output 3 and 4. If I was normally working on my speakers, I'd be using this one. But the cool thing is if you have multiple outputs for multiple monitoring systems, maybe different types of monitors, you can set up different monitors here. I think up to 4 that you can switch between at the touch of a button without having to mess with any buttons on your sound card or anything. You can also have up to 4 reference tracks which are assigned to these 4 Q sends here. I'll show you quickly how to set this up. So if you hit F4 and go into audio connections, move this over here. On a standard setup, you'd have a stereo output. This is our master bus here, and that would be fed through our audio device to a specific output. Now I've got that disconnected, and because it has this little speaker icon, Cubase knows it's our master main output. That gets fed into control room, where I've added 2 monitors. I still have 2 available, which are these guys here. One goes to my complete audio 6 output 1 and 2, and the other one is going to 3 and 4. These 4 reference tracks are not hooked up, But what you do, let me unhide them. I have these as part of a template that I always start with, and I can just drag any reference track I want onto the up to 4 for a project onto here. And all I have to do is to A/B between my main mix and any of these is click these buttons. And I'll demonstrate it maybe with this synth loop on reference 1. If I play now, you'll hear the main mix, but if I hit C1, you'll hear it switch to Tech House synth loop. Now, the reason for that, if I select this channel, is because I've gone into the settings here and turned on Q sends. You may also want to turn on the channel strip. That's not usually activated by default, so you can access the strip there. For these Q sends, and you'll want to notice that I've turned all of the faders down, but I have set these to be pre-fader. If they're green, they're pre-fader. Reference 2 is on Q2, reference 3 on Q3, reference 4 on Q4. Now we're looking at reference 1, and we're going to notice when I play this, we'll have the arrangement, but when I play this, we'll just have this one synth loop. Now imagine this was a fully mastered song, and you have an arrangement here as your mix. Your arrangement is coming through this stereo output, and you may have limiters, compressors, EQs, mastering plugins on here. If you were to run a mastered track through that, it would really skew the comparison, and it would just squash it into oblivion and make it sound like crap. So using these Q sends sends them to the control room, but they bypass your stereo output. So you're just hearing this raw signal, which is a mastered track, or would be, in this case, just this synth loop. So let's have a look at it in action. So you can see that's really useful for referencing against other material. Let's go ahead and move that down here. And then the other real benefit of the control room is that you can downmix your master bus to mono and back to stereo at the click of a button. And you have an independent volume control, which doesn't affect your master bus. That's pretty much all of the benefits that I take from control room. You can use it to feed mics to vocal booths and all kinds of crazy stuff like that if you have a big, more kind of commercial recording studio. I'm just an in-the-box electronic music producer, but even so, there's an abundance of uses for this. It also gives you this listen function. So if you look down here, you can open it and close it here. Listen dim is set to negative 12 dB, and by default you won't have these L's on the mixer. You'll just have a mute button, a solo button, and your effect and your channel strip, basically the effects unit for the channel. With the control room active, it activates these listen features, and instead of soloing, it dims everything else by an amount that you can set here. So let's check that out. It's good for listening to something, to work on it, to clean it up a little bit, but not losing the context of how it sounds with everything else. So that's another feature of the control room that is unavailable in Cubase unless you're using the control room. So that's really it, guys. Just 5 ways to, if you spend the time to set these things up ahead of time, you'll be setting yourself up to be much more productive right off the bat if you're a newcomer to Cubase. Inevitably, when you start out, if you're very new to music and you don't know any theory, you're going to be working with loops, break loops, kick drum loops, percussion loops, depending on the kind of music that you're making. Chances are you're going to be using some loops. And this is a great way to audition everything in key, change the key of an entire project with one button. And like I said, any MIDI information that you record in, if I recorded a piano in over this, as long as you record it in with a project key set at the top up here, it will change based on changing that key. So yeah, sample management, plugin management, setting up these few options that are hidden beneath the surface by default, like the project key, the Q sends, setting up control room, and assigning render in place and bounce audio selection to key commands or mouse buttons. Those, I would say, are the bare minimum that you need to do really to get the most out of Cubase right off the bat. A lot of these things took me a while to kind of get my head around. Like, I wasn't using Control Room until long after it was added to Cubase. I didn't really see any benefit of it until I kind of dug into it and had a look at what it could do. And I wasn't tagging my samples by key, I was just putting them in and kind of transposing them manually. So this can be a great way to just build up a vibe very quickly, and you can build a track around like a little vibe once you've got something going and replace some of this stuff with other synths and MIDI. You don't necessarily have to keep it, or just mangle it beyond belief with filters so it's unrecognizable. Obviously you wouldn't just use these loops straight up like this. It's a little bit bait, but yeah, 5 ways to really speed up your workflow and productivity in Cubase. I hope that was helpful, guys. It's early hours of the morning here, which is about the only quiet time due to traffic that I can record. So, yep, it's been a long time. Hope to get more videos out to you soon. Peace, guys.